Hello everybody and welcome to the post-weekend show on Vital MX. Yes, a slightly different name because the racing is done for the year for the most part. Of course, a couple of off-season events, WSX to come, but for the most part, this podcast will follow an inactive weekend for the foreseeable. And such, the name has changed ever so slightly. But what hasn't changed is our support from DeCal Works, Yamaha Motor USA, Yoshimura, Motorex and Fox Racing. So thank you to those companies for all that they do for us and their, of course, support of the Vital MX post-race show and now the post-weekend show. A couple of points to talk about on this podcast. Of course, Jorge Prado's split from Kawasaki will be assessed. A little bit of Kawasaki talk in addition to that. The Coenens, Vialle, Anderson, WSX's cancellation. Of course, that was meant to kick off this weekend. So considering it's the first off-week show, I would argue that this is fairly stacked out. And on that, Michael Lindsay, my co-host, would you rather start with Prado or something else?
God, it feels like we beat Prado to death, but at the same point it is relevant because it finally happened. And because I was kind of giggling towards the end, there were still people that were either thinking somehow it wasn't going to happen or confused on what the KTM situation is going to look like afterwards. Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing about Prado and why we need to talk about it now is because in the Kawasaki announcement, it was confirmed that the contract will be terminated on October the 16th, which is later this week, Thursday. And that means that most likely a KTM PR will come on Thursday, Friday. Essentially, it means that a KTM PR is imminent. Of course, now we all know he's going to be on a Red Bull KTM factory racing steed, full factory, alongside Eli Tomac, Aaron Plessinger, Julian Beaumer. No Tedder influence, no back of the rig, pop-up 10, none of that. A full-fledged Red Bull KTM rider once more.
That one kind of cracked me up because even this last week I had two different people that are kind of within sort of media circle that both still suggested the Tedder thing. And I was like, if you're, one of the simplest ways I can state it is if you are KTM, let's go off the theoretics of that. Like, you still have to put in the bikes, the parts, the material. You're still going to want one of your technicians on it. No offense to anybody that works at Tedder or has. They would have to put their guy there. They would be doing bonuses, materials. If you are KTM, you are taking this opportunity to get Jorge because he is, as when I asked Ian Harrison, Ironman, if a rider is able to fully get themselves out of their prior contract, in this case Jorge, then a deal could be made. Otherwise, you're not going to, as KTM, with Red Bull as your title sponsor across pretty much everything you do, invest your resources for him to race for their most competing title sponsor in that sense, just to get by for a year. They would never do something like that. Yes, like I said, if somebody was throwing out ideas because they were hitting a wall, maybe it got thrown up on the board at one point, but I could guarantee you if somebody wrote it on the board, the next thing is somebody came by with an eraser and wiped it off because it just wasn't that feasible.
Yeah, while it was always a long shot, though, I don't think it's fair to dismiss it completely because for a while when they were in stalemate, it did seem like that was the only likely scenario. I do think, again, to end up at that point would have been quite something, but I do believe for a couple of weeks there, it was a scenario that the relevant parties were trying to navigate. And the reason why it's still coming up now, I think the Red Bull KTM factory racing development and the Kawasaki confirmation and the Monster confirmation, which I believe is all done as well, all happened quite quickly. I think pre-Nations, the Tedder thing was still somewhat around, the KTM thing was still somewhat of an unknown, and then quite quickly we ended up in a situation where everything became quite clear-cut. So I don't think it was that foolish to suggest it for a while.
I think is, like I said, an idea on the board. I just never see it as once you start really calculating out the reasons, I just never saw as coming into being an actual final option once they got to it. I'm sure there would just be, once it finally gets to that point, somebody would have raised their hand and been like, this is a problem. I am very surprised, though, considering the contract shows, is it the 16th of this week, Lewis, or the 15th?
No, 16th.
16th is being the official termination day because, I wasn't going to say it, but it leaked on IG last week. Like, he's on the bike. he's on the bike. So that part, I'm very surprised that they would risk that in a sense, that he was already riding.
Well, he was already riding pre-Nations from what I was told. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that is a surprise. And that was kind of the first domino to fall at the Nations, was when people were like, no, he's riding. That was when it started to click and go, oh, okay, this is really moving in a direction quite rapidly then. But yeah, the Kawasaki statement said, Kawasaki Motors Corp USA has reached a settlement for the early release of Jorge Prado from his Kawasaki rider agreement effective October the 16th, 2025. Kawasaki wishes the best for Jorge in his future endeavors. Monster Energy Kawasaki is hard at work in preparation for the 2026 SMX World Championship and will announce its 450 and 250 Super Motocross racing team in early November. Which, two things that stand out from that. One, initially I was told we were getting Chase at the end of this week, so that now seems to be the beginning of November, so a little while longer to wait for Chase's PR. And Chase's PR will come in unison with a Pro Circuit PR. They're not going to give Chase his own moment in the sun. He will be lumped in a Kawasaki general racing PR, which is a little bit sad, but hey, who really cares?
And then will he get his own, I'm guessing though, like monster launch?
Yeah, there'll be a monster video and all of that, but as far as rider announcement goes, the first to break. And the second is Monster Energy Kawasaki is hard at work in preparation for 2026, which seems hard considering I don't believe they have a second rider still.
Well, I was going to say it's the next interesting fact. It's kind of weird how of this scenario, like KTM is now very settled. Like, okay, Jorge, like Jorge's coming in. We have Eli coming in. They're keeping Aaron. You know, for them at one point with Chase exiting, it was like, man, what are they going to do with Tom not wanting to take the 450 offer here in lieu of wanting something a little bit more secure like he took in Europe? There for a while, it looked like KTM was going to be on the losing end of things. Kawasaki, of course, nabbing Chase looked to be on the winning end of things. But now at the end of this, a lineup of Aaron, Eli, and Jorge is quite strong. They know what they're doing with mechanics, what the riders are doing. Like, all that's very settled. And Kawasaki is now the one that's in this awkward limbo of, yes, they got Chase, but this just weirdness about the second rider. And the fact that it makes me wonder, like, we've all known the Jorge thing is going sideways for so long, and yes, we know they've reached out to a couple people, but if this would have been settled 2 months ago, and like they knew it was going to happen, would they have been in a better position to get a second rider? Because it is interesting now, like we've talked about, and we'll talk about what the options are, but they are very limited. They are extremely limited, especially when it comes to supercross. Not as much pro motocross, but supercross, it's very limited options for them now.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, we don't need to talk about it again, but had this happened sooner, Tom Vialle likely would have been the favourite to sit next to Chase. They could have maybe spoken to Barsha or Ferrandis a little more seriously before Ducati stamped those down, although I still don't believe contracts are done. It is essentially done in handshake agreement form. So yeah, and I've said this in a few places now, I think that listeners of this podcast, of any podcast, will sometimes think that we or the host is hiding rumours, keeping stuff close to their chest, isn't revealing it. There are no rumours about who Kawasaki's second rider will be. There are theories that come outdoors, Marchbanks will move up, but for Supercross specifically, there's nothing. There's no rumour, there's no murmur, there is nothing out there. So when I sit here and say there's not really anything going on, to my knowledge, I say it with my chest quite confidently, because it's not like, oh, so-and-so called me this morning with a crazy idea that so-and-so is going to take the bike. Nope, there's not even that.
Yeah. Like the Shimoda one we've joked about, and like you've seen a couple people publish that, whether it's in a rumor, in a reel, or something of that nature. But again, that comes down to, if you're just going down the list and you're like, who is available, technically speaking, although I think his deal may have done right before Destinations, I got to double check. You could theoretically say the Joe thing, but again, that's not coming from a place of, oh, people at Cowie are saying this, or people at Monster or Fox are saying this, or, this person called. It's just, hey, yeah, I guess, but there's, the closest thing, what you said is the Gara is the only one I've gotten out of anybody even there going, well, yeah, we said that could work for outdoors. Like, that's the only one, but it wasn't like that's our plan. That's just the only one I've heard from anybody inside that circle at all that said, yeah, we could do this technically.
Yeah, I was told at the Nations that without doubt there will be a second rider throughout the entire 31 race calendar. So I was told going just with Chase for Supercross is not an option. Then I was told that a pro circuit rider moving up for Supercross is also not an option, but it is an option for outdoors. So with that in mind, circling back, I have no idea, and I can't even sit here and spitball ideas at this point because I threw out Barsha because he hadn't signed a contract yet, but that seemed to get squashed, or there wasn't much interest in that. And apart from that, yeah, I don't have much. The hypothetical of Vial, had he never signed his Honda HRC deal in Europe, yeah, that would have been great, but again, not possible. And I really don't know how this plays out. I mean, Gio is still knocking on that door, but until I see a PR, I find it very surprising, or I would find it unbelievable that Gio would end up being a factory Kawasaki rider. So I just don't know. And I will, when there is finally confirmation or a rumor or a hard fact to hold on to, I'm going to be quite interested because it's rare to have such a mystery in this sport.
It is kind of odd, like, man, we talked about this a little bit before. Of the two, if you take the KTM and the Kawi situation, the brand that I feel like is much going to be under much higher scrutiny and have the magnifying glass on them in this situation, but is KTM is getting Jorge off the roughest year of his career. Basically anything up from here is a positive for them. If it doesn't work out, it's a little bit easier for them to wipe their hands clean of the situation. Eli is coming in at the absolute tail end of his career. If he doesn't fully figure it out at KTM, I don't think anybody's really going to bat that much of an eye at it. Now, in Cowie's case, you've got Chase coming, and there's going to be a lot of scrutiny over that situation based on it being his third factory move in just a few years, and then whoever else they end up with, just from the fact of, like, do you feel like it is getting, even though Chase chose to go there, it is getting a little bit to the point where it's not exactly the most sought after location that it was years ago or even a couple years ago, and based on how it goes with Chase and whoever this second guy is going to be, it could affect that even more negatively?
Oh yeah, without doubt. The biggest storyline coming into 2026 is not how will Chase Sexton do on Kawasaki. It is just how will Kawasaki do in general with whoever's on the bike at any moment. Because yes, Prado has attracted a lot of negativity, a lot of murmuring in the paddock, but even before that, the results haven't been there. Kawasaki has fallen to, dare I say, almost irrelevance compared to where it was in the mid-2010s with Tomac and before that Ryan Villapoto. And they need to, A, get back there, but avoid slipping any further, because if there is even the slightest bit of doubt or issue with Chase, I feel like it will push Kawasaki to a position where the rebuilding process will take 8 years. It will not be a position that riders are attracted to. Similar to Yamaha and MXGP, where riders are now actively looking to, A, get out of their contracts, but if they do have an offer from Yamaha, they're scurrying around trying to find something else so they don't have to go to Yamaha. I feel like Kawasaki's kind of teetering on that edge a little bit, only saved by the fact that Prado himself has quite a lot of negativity around him. I would argue that if Prado was an American who had been in SMX for some time, this season would have sunk Kawasaki a lot more significantly. But because Prado's an MXGP guy, it's easier for fans and the industry to kind of just dismiss him because no one knows him that well. So I think that was maybe Kawasaki's saving grace. But it's certainly not a position that you can look at and say with certainty, yeah, that's going to be amazing and that's going to work, because it hasn't worked for some time now. And for reasons out of their control, AC's arms, of course, Anderson was never hired to be a championship contender, I would argue. And in that vein, 2022 was an overperformance from both sides, which was great. 7 wins, 4 in a row to end the season. That was the last time we saw Kawasaki do what Kawasaki expects to do in SMX, at least.
Yeah. And like I said, just that fun note is that counter is, again, if both, even Jorge and Eli, don't have particularly great seasons at KTM, to me, it doesn't affect what you're saying, where riders almost look at it like people are still going to want to sign for KTM the next year if there's a spot available. If you're a guy that gets a call from them, you're still going to want to go to KTM. Where, like I said, Cowie's getting closer to that point where, like I said, Yamaha MXGP, where if you get the call, you're like, is this my only option?
I agree with that about KTM, but I disagree at the same time because KTM has taken its lumps with Chase and to a lesser degree Tom. I would argue that similar to the way that I said Prado is a unique situation which saved Kawasaki to a degree, I think Eli is the same situation. If Eli struggles, complains about the bike, whatever else, I think that KTM can lean on the fact of, well, you know, he's not even meant to be racing at this point. He's on his way out. He's older. He's coming off of a Yamaha that he loves. He rides that bike very differently. That has attributes that he prefers. He's never ridden an Austrian machine before. He's always been Japanese. There are elements that KTM or onlookers who are trying to maybe spin the situation positively can cling to, which will help. But if you want to drill down to its core, another year of a rider complaining about the bike, and let's not forget that Webb was there before he left, after his success. I think it would cause eyebrows to raise as well, or it should do at least.
I will be curious if they do the opposite if at any point during the run, if they do get a championship. There's I guess Chase's to Webb situation is a little different to me. It does actually counter kind of like Cowie era where, hey, riders will say they won't let me do this with the bike or that with the bike, and the team kind of sticks in their way because that's how Cowie was before, and they could still back up to, hey, we had success with Stewart, we had success with Il Poto when we were like that. KTM, while the riders may not be happy, they could still look back if they are able to get success with Prado or Eli. They can be like, well, we had success with Webb. We had success with Chase, technically. We had success with rider we brought in. We had success with Dungey by doing it our way. You know, they can sort of, it's not the best, maybe the best way to go about, but they can kind of toot their own horn or like give themselves a reason to continue the path they are if they are able to get success.
What's funny, and I don't know why this is, but Webb's KTM success seems a lot more recent than Tomac's Kawasaki success. When realistically they crossed over quite aggressively. Like Tomac won 2020, Webb was a champion with KTM in Supercross before that. For some reason, though, Webb feels a lot more recent. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because Tomac's Yamaha era was much more significant, so it kind of pushes the past further behind, whereas Webb, I'd argue, is still, I mean, he's the current champion, but for some reason it still feels quite recent, quite fresh, the whole Yamaha thing.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's only been, 2 years now since the switch, but number two is like you said, I think Eli's Yamaha era was so aggressive so early that it overrides that a little bit. It makes that Cowie time feel much more distant.
Yeah, I think that whatever way you spin it, Yamaha's time with Eli Tomac will be the period that defines his career. I don't think that when it's all said and done, you look back and you think of Eli Tomac on a Kawasaki or Honda. I think that fans will look back and think of him on a Yamaha. And if we get to a point where KTM is so successful that that's what you align Eli with, well, I'd be quite surprised and impressed, to be honest.
It is still going to be... I mean, Eli definitely, the whole trying to wrap my head around him being on a KTM, being a Red Bull athlete, a couple of those things. You know, we've had riders switch, take like Chase's going back to being a monster athlete, for example, but he has kind of jumped back and forth more, and it doesn't have as much legacy to it. It's very interesting that Eli, this late in his career, and I give him props in the sense if he wants to continue racing, this is what he feels like he needs to do, etc. Because there's definitely a lot of people, a lot of brands that would have liked to have kept things where they were. We all know there's all kinds of timeline stuff around that between them, maybe thinking that he decided a little too late and budgets were set, etc., etc. But it is interesting to see a rider with that much legacy, that much success, basically have a somewhat of a visual overhaul right at the end of their career completely.
I wonder if Eli sunk his own battleship a little bit by only doing one-year deals with Yamaha. If they had given him a longer or if he had given them a longer committed to racing generally for more than 1 year at a time, he could be in the middle of a multi-year deal now. Maybe Webb had never gone there. Maybe the whole layout would have shaken out differently. And actually, Tomac's departing Yamaha because he just couldn't lock himself into racing for more than a year at a time.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And even more than the Webb scenario, like, this sounds crazy to say that, to some people that J Coop technically got the spot, but even the same, they had to make a decision like, okay, we have Eli, he was doing these 1-year deals, let's bring in Coop. Coop will take over for him in a sense as our veteran guy, as our championship contender. But they were still, toying with J Coop, bringing J Coop up to see if he could succeed on the 450. And then with Eli still being kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, they had to make a decision. J Coop was building. He was going to be a solid guy, could continue to progress. You had to make the long-term commitment to Webb. And then with Deegan in the wings, like it all just kind of, like say, if he would have put his foot down earlier and said he wanted a multi-year deal, they would have figured it out. And what I mean figured out, they wouldn't have magically created budget out of thin air to run all of them, but somebody wouldn't have been kept. Probably, I hate to say, but probably like a J Coop situation. Maybe Webb wouldn't have gone as much accelerators in his deals or something. They would have tried to balance out the budget in some way, shape, or form to be able to support that cast of characters.
The narratives at Kawasaki, KTM, Yamaha crossover so aggressively here. It's quite crazy. Obviously, you have Tomac, who's now going to have ridden for all of them. Chase, who's going from KTM to Kawasaki. Prado, Kawasaki to KTM. And perhaps the most reassuring element of all of this is Yamaha were in the same position as Kawasaki were or are now in the late 2010s, early 2020s. And they've returned to be arguably the most prominent manufacturer. Now, Honda is, of course, doing a very good job of putting themselves on a pedestal. But Yamaha's right there, I would argue, knocking on the door. So it is possible to correct course and get back into the mix of being, admirable, successful. Yeah. And that all came, arguably, I'm trying to think, that all came with Tomac. It really did.
With what, Star's move?
No, well, Yamaha's I guess it came with Star, but it was Tomac who really put Yamaha 450-wise back into the frame of success.
I mean, well, you can do Yamaha, but then you also have even like Dylan actually got the first 450 title for that program.
Yeah, I guess.
I think overall...
I guess.
I agree with your sense, because, Tomac put up multiple titles, but in general, looking at both programs, you have Yamaha, which was the in-house program, the crew that had been there arguably too long, and people said we're very stuck in their ways, and the program was stuck in their ways, and the components, and who had input and everything. Cowie gets some of the same criticisms, and even at a point, I would say Honda right around the era didn't seem to be as stringent, but still kind of lost in their ways on what to do. And you look at how Yamaha let an outsourced program, Star, have an immense amount of say. It's still technically Yamaha's program. Yamaha pays the bills, but they let Star have their way with it. And look how it's worked out for them. Then you look at Honda, a team that lets certain higher-ups have their way, change out a lot of staff, a lot of working conditions, a lot of ways they do stuff, and then riders come in that have a ton of say and basically restructure the whole program. Now, like you said, so if you're Cowie, the light is, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, hey, these two large programs that are both behemoths, Yamaha, if you go back, let's go back 70s, 80s, 90s, like Yamaha and Honda are behemoths, and they both had fallen off the path and now have had a huge resurgence. So for Cowie, you can say that, but does it take somewhat of a bloodbath internally of how things are done, who's there, everything? Because that's, in an argument, that's kind of what it took at Honda and Yamaha to accomplish what we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree, but I still disagree to the point where you can do whatever you want with Yamaha, make Star run the program, do whatever else. Had it not been for a rider to come along and put the bike on top, then the optics could have still been quite negative.
It takes both. I mean, same with the Lawrence. Like, again, you could say he's a Honda. Like, the Honda, look at what the Lawrences have done for them. But also in the same breath, the Lawrences were at Geico, and the program was, towards the end, really starting to struggle. And they weren't shy. They were starting to build, but they weren't absolutely just putting it on the map like they are now. So it takes a combination. It takes, what's the old saying? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. The team needs to be prepared and have the opportunity ready for when the right rider comes along. So in Kawasaki's case, like, you have that with Chase, but can we sit here and confidently say they are prepared for the opportunity that they have been given? Is luck on their side?
I don't know if they're prepared, but I can imagine there is a lot of pressure internally at Kawasaki to make this work. And arguably there was pressure to make Prado work. We saw how much effort they put into that, and it still wasn't enough. Those lessons will loom large, be valuable with Chase, but this would be a high-stakes situation at Kawasaki. Arguably, again, much more high stakes than Tomac and KTM just because of the respective positions that each rider is at in their career. So, it's going to be fascinating. It really will. And, I mean, Chase is locked into a multi-year deal, so you could argue that 2026 doesn't mean that much because there's always 2027 will come, but then so does Prado. So maybe that's now irrelevant as well.
Now take that 2 years. If sadly it doesn't go great, again at the end, I'm curious just how it will be taken internally. Like if it doesn't go well, does everything? And this is not against any single individual at that program. Again, just back to even like how the Yamaha thing or Honda, maybe just as a collective group, it's just not working. If it doesn't the next 2 years, do they just keep going the path and try a different rider and only tweak a little thing or two? Or does somebody really high up go, start from scratch, get Mitch to do it, get somebody else to do it? Because we, like I said, follow the path that others have done. If it's not working, what's the old saying? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results is insanity.
Again, no. Interesting, because if you compare this to the Yamaha period of being low, in, again, late 2010s, early 2020s, unless, there was Webb, but he was a rookie, there was Chad, but he was late on. When you had Barsha and AP, you could argue that neither of those were really expected to be that successful. So the riders, again, protected Yamaha to a degree. There's nowhere to hide for Kawasaki and Chase because we know what Chase can be. Chase has told everyone what he can be in the right scenario. So there's nowhere to hide. There's no excuse. There's no, this is Kawasaki. You better put the bike on the top of the box because that's essentially the corner that this partnership is going to back them into.
Now, question, if they do reach success, Chase in the first 2 years of contract gets 1 to 2 titles. We're on a string. We've got great win numbers. Does Cowie turn him into their Eli before where they just, even if there are some disagreements, do they keep their foot down or do they recognize they need Chase and they start really buckling down and doing everything possible to continue to keep him and make him sort of not a lifer or anything can change at the end of a career, but make it a very long-term commitment, whether that's financially or in terms of making changes that he wants? Or do you think they take a step back to their old way of like, nope, this is how we do things, it works, again, kind of back to like the Villo-esque era?
But again, Prado was evidence that they aren't in that old way. No, I mean, you never really know without being there. Maybe they only gave him so much rope and he could have done with all of it. Impossible to say, but I think any manufacturer enters a partnership expecting it to be a lifer situation, don't they? I don't think that KTM signed Chase thinking, we'll wait for these 2 years to be done and then we'll can him. Even Honda and Chase.
Cowie. I was going to say enough Cowie Prado talk.
Well, we didn't even talk about Prado. We talked about Prado for like 4 minutes. But let's pay some bills with this thing. Of course, Chase and Kawasaki isn't official yet, so I'll do this for one final time. Chase Sexton has used DeCal Works for 2 years. Took those graphics customizable for you as well as him, although he doesn't have as much freedom as you could, the listener, if you head to decalmx.com. He took the DeCal Works graphics to multiple Supercross wins, very nearly a 450 SX championship, a 450 MX championship in 2024. He took them to highs and lows in his KTM tenure, and if you head to decalmx.com, you can do similar with your own customizable graphics as well as everything else that they have going on there, and it really is quite a lot. There's a wide array of products, and speaking of Prado, of course, wore Fox Racing at Kawasaki and will continue to at KTM. Bold, untamed, and pushing for boundaries of aesthetic style and design. That's my old read, so I'm just going to cut that there and start again with from preparation to testing, from anticipation to the start line, it all builds up to this. The gate drop, just like pros and aspiring amateurs alike, the all-new MX26 racewear collection is built for the build-up and beyond with movement-conscious design and material choices paired with thoughtful graphics that celebrate individual performance and style. Each piece stands as a representation of the many moods of mayhem and expression found in the heat of the battle, deceptive calm to complete chaos. What will you unleash today? Of course, big news expected from Fox here shortly because they've signed Hayden Deegan. I would presume that's going to be a November the 1st thing because he'll be wearing it in WSX 2 weeks into November.
They basically filmed all last week. I know they shot at on-track stuff at Kihia middle of last week, early in the morning, and then they did some stuff in LA, it looks like. I'm sure they'll put a huge push them, and I think we've talked about before, I'm like, regardless of how you feel about Hayden or not, from a perspective for the sport, I love the fact that, you've had A-Star has, the very serious, clean-cut athletes in the terms of Chase and the Lawrence brothers, etc. And then with Fox getting Deegan, I just like the clash. Regardless if what the actual racing ends up looking like in the first year or two on the 450s with those groups against each other, just having the clash from a marketing standpoint, I think is always really good for the sport.
Yeah, of course. And Fox Racing synonymous with some of the greats, and that seems to be the case moving forward. We could do an entire debate now on whether Prado is already one of the greats or if he still needs to get there. That could literally be an hour discussion where you could really play both sides quite aggressively. But we're not going to do that because enough Prado talk. Let's talk about the Coenens, who are going to, per my conversations at the Motocross of Nations, going to follow a very Prado-esque path. It does seem that they are locked in for the first couple of supercrosses. Similar to Prado, I think it's quite loose. See how it goes, see what happens. Lucas will be on a 450. Of course, I think that was expected, but I wouldn't have been surprised if you told me he was going to drop down to 250s just for supercross. Sasha 250, of course. They are training at Master Pools at the moment. I have no idea how that's going. I don't really have a source there that can fill me in on the situation. But if all goes well and they execute the January plan, let's say, it's going to be interesting. I really don't know how that will go. I think my biggest takeaway at this point is that the plan is they don't come to America full-time until 2028, and that's fairly set in stone. So I would think that this January plan would make sense for 2027 rather than 2026. But to each their own, I guess. I guess it's more experience. Why not?
It is odd if they do, because I kind of under that assumption of like, okay, if they're going to do it this year, it kind of feels like the move would be next year, because that's the precedent that has not only been set by Jorge, but, well, it would have been set by Porcel if it wasn't for the major injury he faced, because he came originally in 07, was supposed to come here in 08, but they ended up coming in 09. But then take Roxon did his 5 rounds the 1 year, 6 or so when the GP started.
I think he did
the
all
GP
but
started later.
1 or all but 2.
2, maybe it was 7. It was weird. It was pre multiple East West, but I know he did the whole. It was back to a schedule like right now where the opening like 5 or 6 rounds were West. So I know he got all those, and then didn't he fly back and actually do one after GPs?
Yeah, did a couple. He
did like Seattle.
As long as it didn't clash with MXGP, he was racing. I mean, the most overlooked fact in the sport is that Ken Roxon's first Supercross win, if you want to call it that, came in the heat race in Vegas, which was technically a main event because of the whole showdown situation.
Yeah.
But wasn't a main event, because at that point I don't think it was scored as a main event. And
he did do more that year than I was. I just went back and looked because he did A1 Phoenix, LA, Oakland, A2. And then it gets better. He hadn't even left for GPs yet. He went to Houston and raced the 350.
Yeah, he did Daytona
then
as well,
went to
didn't he?
Then he went into San Diego and did West. Then he went to Daytona and did 350. And then it got back to how different the GP schedule was. That was March 5th that year. Then he went back to do GPs, and then he was able to come back over and do Salt Lake and Vegas. And yes, he is credited as a win in Vegas because the heat race was a main event. So he's credited with a win at Vegas and then a third in the shootout.
Yeah, no one talks about it. It really is one of the most overlooked wins or first wins in the sport, which is, I mean, it was a main event, but it was a heat race, so it's completely understandable. It's a weird place and time to win your first race, quote unquote.
I think he only missed 1 race that year then, because he did 8 main events technically, and I think there was 9 on the schedule for West Coast that year.
Anyway, back to Coenens, 2028 is locked in. That is when they are coming to America. By that point, both of them realistically should be world champions. I would say that quite confidently. I would argue that if in 28 one of them or neither of them are world champions, that's quite a fail. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll wait and see. But it's definitely going to be another very exciting storyline come A1. Next to Chase on Cowie, Prado on KTM, Tomac on KTM, and all the rest.
Yeah. It is interesting to see how Lucas does with the transition, just because, you know, we had talked about the Jorge. It's like, oh, the only other examples we had of this, you know, anything recent were Albertine and Tortelli, I believe. Both had to come directly to Premier Class. So we've just had it with Prado, and it'll be kind of fun to compare how Lucas does with the transition, because theoretically, of course, Lucas is on paper much less experienced. Jorge came over as a 4-time world champion. Lucas will be coming to do his opening stint. Well, sorry, excuse me. When Jorge came over to do his couple races, he was a 3-time world champ at that time. But Lucas is coming over with none, and if he outperforms, do you give Lucas a chance at outperforming Jorge in comparison over his opening stint races?
No, because Prado was just solid. He just kind of rode around very consistently and safely. I think Coenen will be a little bit more erratic and touch and go. So there may be a high of a lap that outscores what Prado did in his little test run, but I don't think that results-wise he would. It just, again, coming in 2028, 2027 makes sense. GPs are starting earlier next year, the 22nd of February. And that means the pre-season races will be end of January. Hurlings is changing teams. Geyser is changing teams. There's a lot of that going on in the paddock. It really feels like the 2026 MXGP title is there for the taking for Lucas Coenen. And I would argue that this really puts that in jeopardy. Not just from an injury point of view, but from a testing and preparing point of view. Because if you're Fevra, and Fevra even said this to me at the Nations, but it applies to Coenen as well. With everyone changing teams, if you're Fevra or Coenen, your easiest path to success is to catch your rivals napping in the first quarter of the season.
Yeah.
And this could mean that Coenen is the one who's napping, and that, I don't know, I feel like that could hurt to a degree.
And you could argue, I mean, he started the season injured this year. That's where, theoretically, if you had to go back and look at it, his weakest point to Fevra for the title comes is him having to ease into it at the beginning of the season versus if he could have started stronger.
Yeah.
And like I said, so I get, you know, they're going to make the transition here. So to your point, what on paper seems to make more sense is, hey, come over. We're in October. They're in Supercross. Do October through November. Do 5-6 weeks on Supercross, and then go home and really buckle down, wipe the floor, win that world title in a very convincing fashion, and then come back and do prep plus Supercross, 6 rounds, whatever it is, next year, and then the transition the year after.
I mean, as with anything, this isn't a firm deal. They could quite easily opt out or opt in for more, so it wouldn't surprise me if they don't turn up at A1 at all, but as of now, that is the plan. So time will tell, I guess. Speaking of the Euros, let me tell you what happened at the Euro circuit over the weekend, because we did have some racing at Valkenswaard. Kaida Wolf won from Jeffrey Hurlings and Liam Everts, which means it was a Motorex sweep of the podium. Even in the off-season, Motorex just defining dominance. Motorex, known for high-quality engine oils, also has an entire line of clean care and lube products to keep your bike running strong and looking great. Maintenance made easy with race-proven clean care and lube products. Of course, the Coenens using Motorex as well, as does Tom Vialle, who has left Red Bull KTM Factory Racing officially now. Much like Prado, he is officially in limbo. Announced as departing his old team, not announced at his new team. Heavily expected to be Honda HRC and MXGP. He will debut on that bike in Argentina, if I remember my WSX wildcards correctly, early November. So there must be an announcement coming soon. And that, once again, I've beat this drum a while, is going to be my most interesting story of 2026. A shrewd move. One that I think could lay a new path for stars of the future, like the Coenens, like Prado even. And yeah, I like it, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the announcement looks like and what the online reaction is to it, although everyone does know, to be fair.
Yeah. I'm really curious. I said this one of the times we talked about it earlier this year was or earlier, so it's after you broke the story that it was happening. I'm curious, very curious, because Tom does on paper have a very impressive career in terms of world championships on MX2, coming to US, getting supercross titles, going back to GPs. If he can pick up an MXGP world title, if for instance, the schedule would almost work out better now for him because they cancel the first round of WSX. But if he could go through and race the full WSX schedule with Garibaldi, which I believe theoretically could happen in the next year or two, the chances of Tom having on his records MX2 world champion, a US 250 Supercross champion, potentially become an MXGP world champion, potentially be a world Supercross champion. It does create a very interesting path, especially with if World Supercross does. I guess it depends which way they tread, because you could say if they tread on US, they might tread on GPs eventually. But if they tread just in a way that it could set up Tom to be able to race both those championships, and who knows, maybe eventually try the US one more time. He could, down the road, go down as one of the most impressive riders in this sport without really, I know he kind of gets overlooked already for his accomplishments, and he could trend a very interesting path in a way he has ever done before.
Vial's already locked in for the full WSX championship next year and the year after. So
thank you.
It's actually a done deal, like a contract and everything. So he will be the first MXGP WSX, I don't know what you want to call that, shared custody rider, which I think is what... I think that is what everyone views as the easiest path to success for WSX, is if you can get in a place where, much like American riders do Supercross and Outdoors, the top Europeans do Supercross and Outdoors just in FIM territory. I think that's kind of the common consensus of how this could work best, although that's difficult when MXGP is, quote-unquote, in bed with the AMA, MX Sports and Feld more so than WSX. But I would be very curious to see if we enter a world where the FIM kind of say to MXGP, hey, we want you to play with these guys now. Like,
on the schedule.
Stop playing with these guys and play with these guys. Because again, that seems like the easiest path to success for WSX. Then again, the FIM tried to make in front by WSX, and that didn't go well either. So I guess maybe that's not as easy as it sounds on paper. But no, Vial is, as time goes on, as time matures and we have a chance to lean on hindsight, recollect, reflect, and enjoy past memories, we're going to realise that Tom Vial was much better than we ever gave him credit for. Because not just on this podcast, but on podcasts in the sport in general, the majority of the time, the conversation looked negatively upon him rather than positively. I feel like that, without sitting down and writing down timestamps and percentages and everything, I feel fairly confident that that would be the case. And I think that as time goes on, we'll realise that actually he was just extremely underrated and not given the credit he deserves. And I hope, or I believe, that that will change now moving forward with what he does in MXGP, or maybe not. Because maybe similar to US Outdoors, in MXGP, if he doesn't win, everyone's going to be like, well, why isn't he winning? That's terrible. Maybe that is just the corner that Tom Vial is backed into. I don't know.
Two things on that. One, what you mentioned about the next 2 years for Tom and WSX, that was part of what I was hinting at, I believe, because this year there is 7 teams in WSX, including Stark coming in. That's basically, Garibaldi did have a team before with the Nils Honda team. I believe, from what I'd heard, he is coming back the following season with a full-fledged team. So that would involve Tom. The second one I was going to say was interesting on what you had mentioned, if down the road the FIM kind of pressured in front of MXGP to play nice, per se, with the schedule for those guys. But let's say theoretically, also, the US GP combined race, if Dan's ever able to make that work as well with Davey, if they figure that out in the next 2 or 3 years, like they've hinted at they're still interested in, MXGP could become everybody's best friend. They could be working with everyone.
Well, I don't know if that works in the current climate. I don't think you're allowed to be everyone's best friend. I think you have to pick a side. And
I think maybe they can skim it. Maybe they can figure out how, instead of being the bad guy they were before, maybe they can be everyone's best friend.
I haven't quite figured out where we're at with WSX, of if you can be everyone's best friend or if the lines are still quite aggressive. I feel like it will very much depend on how the 2026 calendars evolve. And speaking of, what a brilliant segue. Well, actually, before we do that, Tom Vial, once Motorex and DeCal Works, now going to soon be announced as a Yoshimura R&D rider. And you can head to yoshimura-rd.com yourself to get a similar exhaust system that Tom Vialle will soon be relying on. You head to their website and there is a nice massive photo of Team Australia on top of the Motocross of Nations podium, because of course Yoshimura swept that as well. Everywhere you look in different corners of the world, Yoshimura is doing great things, and you can rely on similar power for your steed by heading once again to yoshimura-rd.com. So WSX on the eve of the Monster Energy FIM Motocross of Nations, and I can't help but feel as though that timing was slightly intentional to maybe ensure that eyeballs were directed elsewhere, ensure that there would be a solid news cycle to keep things moving quite quickly. They announced that Stockholm would host the Grand Prix of Sweden in either the last weekend of November or the 1st of December. I always forget with that one. And then in the PR, deep, it was confirmed that Sweden is joining as replacement for round 1, which has been cancelled. It was really done.
It was buried. I had to dig.
It was done in the most PR savvy, to their credit. You can tell the PR team has really made a strategy with that to not make the Malaysia cancellation the headline. And of course it is big news because, as Tom Burwell has said in multiple locations, their intention was just to carry out a solid calendar. And unfortunately 2026 will now already go down, 2025 will go down as not that. Now, if they run the current 5-round calendar successfully, will anyone remember Malaysia being cancelled? Probably not. That'll probably just be a little bit of a sidebar. But as of now, with it being round 1 especially, it's a tough look. In public-facing comments, the WSX promoters, SX Global, were quite adamant and scathing almost. This was nothing on them. The promoters at the stadium in Malaysia didn't meet requirements or couldn't host, or essentially the promoters in Malaysia messed up or didn't have the facilities they needed. Again, eyebrow raised to a degree, because do you not have that figured out 2 weeks before the event? Like, surely you know what is there and what they can do or what they can't do or what won't be possible, unless there was some sort of issue that arose, like, I can't even think, like an event in Malaysia that used all of the resources and there wasn't enough left for WSX. I don't know. But yeah, tough go.
Lewis, because it all blends together, I have to ask this. Was UK supposed to be on the calendar this year and got like early clipped, or was that last year?
Oh, how long ago was that? No, that was that was for this year.
Yeah,
but I don't think there was ever a calendar out, was there?
No, it was just, hey, it was on the initial PR, like we will be.
It was the event. The event was announced, but it didn't have a place in a calendar.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was just saying. Because when you say the Malaysia round, like even what I say there with the UK round, yes, the Malaysia round as a whole will not be remembered. It will just be the running joke when we get to another calendar next year of wonder how many they'll cancel this year.
Well,
until they can get through one season without doing it, that dark cloud will sadly hang over their head a little bit until they can get to one without it happening.
Well, crucially, I spoke to a WSX team owner, team manager after the Malaysian cancellation and said, has the confidence you had with the new owners gone a little bit now? Like, are you back to being very skeptical? And they very quickly were like, yeah, I'm pissed. Because I think, and I subscribe to this to a degree, I very much bought into the new ownership, the messaging. Like, it certainly gave me confidence, and I can imagine it did tenfold for the partners involved in the series. And this was the first evidence that the issues are fundamental to WSX, more so just for previous promoters. Again, it can still go a lot better. A solid 5-race calendar would be a massive improvement, especially if it goes off without a hitch. But let's just say they've used their mulligan now. Another cancellation would be catastrophic. They are on thin ice. Mulligan used. They can't afford another strike next to their record. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Fair takeaway.
Something I don't think we give enough credit to Feld when it comes to this to the situation. And I get it. There's a difference between hosting all the events in one country, the insurances, the staff. There's a lot to it. But Feld, like him or not, does host all these events themselves outside of the Daytona Supercross, they don't rely on promoters. They are the promoter. They're the host of the series. They logistics everything. They take all in the back, and that's why we tend to have such a secure situation with them. And I think that's also, in return, a lot of people give MX Sports sometimes a little bit of hell about the schedule not changing that much. But I also see the fact for them of, like Dave says multiple times, like, we have 11 really good tracks promoter groups right now. We don't like to fiddle around with that because look at what happens. Because, I mean, you see this even on a grander scale a little bit with MotoGP and F1. This still does happen almost once a year for them, roughly once every other year, as they run into a round where there's a huge promoter issue. The facility is not ready, the track is not ready, etc. So that's always going to be a tough thing for WSX that will be part of it if they are using promoters for all the venues.
And to bring it closer to motocross, MXGP is currently not in Indonesia because the Indonesian promoter didn't pay their bills. So that's off. And I think that's similar. I may be talking out of turn, but from memory, I think that's the same situation with India and MotoGP. I think it was India.
Yeah, so, something like that. India, and then one of them flat out didn't have the track ready.
Yeah, I think that was Kazakhstan, wasn't it?
Yes.
But to WSX, MXGP, F1, and MotoGP's credit, I think that if you run an international championship, that is the model. I don't think you can do it any other way. Because you can't have a man in an office somewhere who's just an expert on running events in Kazakhstan, America, France. Like, that's just not going to work, is it? How would you? I wouldn't even know where to start. So that is just a byproduct of an international series. And you know what? To your earlier point, I don't count London against WSX because MXGP have done that. Oman was on the calendar, and then it wasn't. But it was cancelled long in advance of the event.
Yeah,
so it was kind of just it was kind of just an intention in my mind rather than a locked-in moment. And that's how I feel about London. 2 weeks before is obviously a little bit more of a sensitive cancellation. Because at that point, you had all the intention in the world to go to that location. Yeah. And to my knowledge, some teams even, well, I know pretty much everyone had their flights booked, of course. Yeah. But some teams already had bikes on the way and whatever else. So, yeah, it's a different kettle of fish. I mean, in the same vein, the MXGP provisional calendar is out. The first round is a double TBA, rumoured or intending to be in Abu Dhabi, Dubai sort of area. If that falls off, I don't think anyone's going to go, fucking MXGP, they can't do a calendar. I think it's just like, oh, well, they were trying that and it didn't work. Now, if Abu Dhabi / Dubai is cancelled 2 weeks before,
yes,
different story. But again, the SMX League doesn't really do provisional calendars either. The provisional calendar is also a very World Championship European thing. The SMX League is almost like a music tour. Which is like, here are our tour dates, here we go.
They still, I mean, to their credit, to what you're saying and why MXGP gets away a little bit is they leave it as a TBA. We do technically have that with the 3 SMX rounds. They are TBA at the moment. We did lock in everything else, but they did hold those 3 dates for further announcements.
Yeah, but I think that's just the way they run things, isn't it? Just because of and also different series. Like, I mean, it's technically a year away. It's almost a 2027 series.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough one though. We're used to Cinema, so again for WSX, like I guess if they went more, like you said, it's down to that it happened 2 weeks before. If it was a provisional calendar that had a TBA and it got canceled, it's no big deal. It's just that they have. And it's different ownership now, but the series as a whole has a reputation for having events, even potentially selling tickets or stuff like that, but then having to cancel them mere weeks, month before said race. Yeah. And then trying to come up with backup plans and different things of that nature. At least in their part, they came out with a solid backup plan where we've had times before where they've canceled a round, then gone to all the teams and tried to convince them to do a doubleheader or different things like that. So... but to your point, I asked a couple of the 2 teams I knew, hey, when did you guys know the round was off? And they told me about 12 hours before we got the PR. They knew that they weren't going.
Yeah, I would love to know more of the specifics of what the Malaysian promoter didn't have. Because, yeah, like I don't know what you wouldn't already know when you're due to fly there in 2 weeks. I mean, it must have been a surprise. Or maybe the promoter just phoned up with 2 weeks to go and went, yeah, we're out. Maybe ticket sales were in the dumps and the promoter was like, yeah, we don't want to do this. This isn't going to be worth it for us. You know, maybe it was something like that. Maybe didn't have the facilities or whatever the wording was just a way to protect themselves. Yeah. So what's coming up? We've got Vialle to Honda HRC should be coming up very, very soon.
Tomac to KTM should be this week or next week.
Yeah, I think next week, if I had to guess.
Prado to KTM will probably be the day after the Cowie, that 16th day. So a slew of them. We did have, we actually skipped over a little bit because it was last week news, but Anderson to WSX Anderson to HEP, but he's racing WSX.
Is it not HEP anymore? It isn't, is it? It hasn't been HEP for a while.
It's weird because their US, like their Instagram channel is still HEP, and like I think the Suzuki PR still has it listed in the bottom as HEP for the US stuff, but yes, WSX is PMG.
I thought it was PMG in America now as well.
Even go look at their Instagram, it's still listed as HEP Motorsports.
Yeah. Well.
Then again, at one point I had to message them because about 6 months after the year had started, they had the wrong sponsors on their Instagram.
Well, I'm sure they were very happy that you got involved with that.
Yes, I know. They're very happy with me at the moment.
You're like that annoying neighbour who's on the other side of the road going, oh, you haven't cut your grass in a while.
Well, I'm not allowed at the truck anyways again, so whatever.
Well, that's a completely different story.
But the Anderson thing falls in the category of something, I know everybody was really excited for October 1st, and of years past, that was contract day. That is very much changed between GP riders and their lengths of their contracts and WSX schedules and MXON schedules and everybody wanting to get out of the noise of announcing on the same day and riders being able to ride in private and stay secretive for a couple weeks. So can we just say October 1st basically doesn't mean anything anymore?
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. You're always going to get the lower level teams. This is a funny look at how the hierarchy in the sport works. The lower level teams are still clinging to October the 1st. Because I think they haven't quite caught up. Whereas the factories, October the 1st is the most archaic, irrelevant date ever.
Well, I think for the smaller teams, I've experienced this with one or two, is there's either rumors about their situation or what riders are going to have. Like some of the smaller teams are very excited to be like, look, we have people. We have riders. These are them. Now we can talk about it. Where, bigger team, we already know who's going to be there. There's just so much more certainty around your A-level teams.
Well, sometimes moving too quick can hurt you, like Carson Mumford, who's done an entire photo shoot with number 72, and he's actually number 71. So
I felt so bad having a texture.
So sometimes it's worth just, waiting a week, because you never quite know. It's a valuable lesson that you never quite know what's coming next. But yeah, back to the point, what's coming next. Yeah, I don't think we're getting Prado and Tomac in the same week. So I would think we maybe get one this week and one next week. Tomac, again, I think he's Argentina as well. Or maybe he's Canada. I think he might be Canada.
I think Canada, unless they moved it. It should be Canada.
It's hard to keep track of the wild cards in WSX. They're all over. But point being, Tomac is racing relatively soon, so a PR is quite desperate for him. Prado isn't doing anything. So Prado, Vialle, Tomac are probably the next load. I would think we're going to get all of that before Chase, early November. And then once we've had those four, Deegan to Fox, which is kind of in its own category. Once we've got those four, I don't know if we've really got anything big to drop.
Just the second Cowie, but that'll be also announced. They're hoping to... God, it shows how quickly they have to make it happen, because I imagine they're going to have all that done for that November 1st launch, huh?
Yeah, because that's what I said to Cowie in SMX. I said, how are you announcing Chase? And I said, the same we do every year. We're going to do all of our riders in one PR. Like, this is our SMX racing lineup. So yeah, it would be in there, unless it's going to be so late that they just say second rider announced soon. But you can't wait much longer. Like a rider isn't going to appear out of the middle of nowhere. Like the playing field is what it is. It's time to recruit someone or no one. Which they say it's not going to happen, but I can't get away from the fact that it seems quite attractive, because what's out there isn't overly attractive.
I got one for you before we sign off. what to you is the biggest, because we're basically wrapping up silly season, what is the biggest what if of this year? You
This year or
mentioned
next year?
this year's signing cycle. So going into next year. So what I was saying with that is, like you mentioned, hey, if Kawasaki would have figured this out earlier, like that one's much more theoretical. But then on the end of what if was, Tomac actually testing the Ducati and then making that attempt at him. Is there any others that come to mind, or is there a what if, whether it actually was close to happening or a theoretical for you?
No, because I think that everyone's kind of ended up exactly where they were. I mean, Tomac not to fuel this, but had Tomac gone back to Kawasaki, that would, of course, been very, very interesting. And yeah, no, I think everything's kind of played out as we expected around the middle of the year. I think in the middle of the year, all of these moves were rumored, and there wasn't a drastic change one way or another. Yeah. Like even Tomac, he was testing the Ducati. There was Triumph rumors, but of that group, KTM was always the safe pick, the logical pick, wasn't it? It was more.
It's funny though, is I remember doing the news break for the Tomac Ducati test at East Rutherford Supercross on press day, and I listed off the 3 teams that were potential were Triumph, KTM, and Ducati, and the news was around the Ducati test upcoming, so I framed it as that. I actually labeled Triumph, I thought, as the second most option, and I threw out KTM as hey, this is a long shot, but KTM could make it work with Chase potentially leaving. Going all the way back then, I actually thought KTM was the least of the 3 to happen, and then over the next 2 weeks, it very quickly went from third to number 1 option.
Well, I guess it's all dominoes, isn't it? Like, I'm trying to think when I first found out that Chase was out. Because if you didn't know that at that point, then it changes the playing field. Like that, the second it was kind of official or kind of known that Chase was leaving, then everything else changes, doesn't it? It's like the stock market. Everything moves in reaction to that one change. But yeah, I can't remember for the life of me when that played out. All I remember is Seattle, him swearing blind to me that he hadn't signed, and I just remember aggressively shouting at him, saying, "Who? You would tell me. You would tell me. I know you would tell me." Yeah. But anyway, are we done? Any final thoughts?
That's it. We'll do more of these. We're committed to talking through the whole off season.
Yeah, it's kind of a bi-weekly show, but I think that bi-weekly is a rough framework, and if stuff happens, then maybe weekly, or who knows. The goal is at minimum bi-weekly, and that will also be the goal on the MXGP podcast show, which I hope to do next Monday, because equally similar to this, Brian Bogers has retired, Jago Geertz has been announced as leaving Yamaha. Obviously, by
DeWolf's
then,
450 move.
Yeah, DeWolf's 450 move. By then, we should have Vial's Honda HRC announcement, and there's a couple of other things as well. So there's similar news items in the MXGP world to discuss. Of course, Hurlings and Geyser not announced until January the 1st. I'll be saying that a lot coming up because that's the only thing there is to really say about either of those riders. Yeah. Nothing happening.
How far out is the official Ducati Louis Wouters thing?
Who knows? I mean, I'd imagine it could be any moment now. It depends, I guess, on what the team's contract with Fantic was and what Ducati's contract with Maddie was. Whether they were allowed to talk about being free or not. But I think that's going to be a very productive partnership. I think it's really going to accelerate and help the situations quite a lot. But anyway, thank you to DeCal Works, Yamaha Motor USA, Yoshimura Motorex and Fox Racing for their support of this very podcast, the post-weekend show. It won't be called a post-race show for quite a while, unfortunately, or maybe it will never go back to being a post-race show, and it will always discuss the weekend that was coming off of the back of that. We will see you real soon for another episode when there's a little bit more to discuss. Thank you for watching and listening once again.